Psalm of David when Nathan the prophet came unto him after he had gone into Bathsheba. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity, cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against thee, the only, have I sinned and done this evil. Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing today in the Epistle to the Romans, the Apostle Paul's Epistle to the Romans. And like in all my studies, we focus on the actual text itself, and not so much the background. But we're going to pick it up in the middle of verse 30, actually, where we left off last time, as far as when we get to the detailed. As far as the reading, we're going to read deeply into chapter 2. About to where we did last time. Maybe not so far, actually. Let's pick it up at verse 16. That was his introduction. And then he says he's ready to preach the gospel at Rome also. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, divinity, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. Thank you for bearing with me. Amen. For this cause, God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error, which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Therefore, thou art inexcusable, O man, whosoever thou art that judgest. For wherein thou judgest another, thou condemnest thyself. For thou that judgest doest the same things. But we are sure that the judgment of God is according to truth against them which commit such things. And thinkest thou this, O man, that judgest them which do such things, and doest the same, that thou shalt escape the judgment of God? Or despisest thou the riches of his goodness and forbearance and long-suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leadeth thee to repentance? But after thy hardness and impenitent heart treasurest up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God, who will render to every man according to his deeds. To them who by patient continuance in well-doing seek for glory and honor and immortality, eternal life. But unto them that are contentious, and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, indignation and wrath, tribulation and anguish upon every soul of man that doeth evil, of the Jew first, and also of the Gentile. But glory and honor and peace to every man that worketh good, to the Jew first, and also to the Gentile. For there is no respect of persons with God. For as many as have sinned without the law shall also perish without the law, and as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. For not the hearers of the law are justified before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another. In the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. And he breaks into this sidebar, and we're going to pause there in the reading, because I think starting tomorrow we'll begin reading the whole of chapter 2. Because I'm quite sure we won't get that far. And there's enough here to digest, because this is the complete thought he's been laying out since chapter 1. Going into chapter 2 is the part about you are not excusable. And we were looking at the different things he talks about, in some way. Because, if we can't, we should be able to easily find ourselves here. Because we have done one or the other, or forms of great and small, maybe perhaps nearly all of these things. Like I said, when you consider that Jesus reckoned, if you're angry with your brother, to be in the same categorical sin as murdering him. Meaning it's you're in the same path of unrighteousness. It's what, when they talk about the slippery slope, or like, you start off with, cigarettes, and then pretty soon you're smoking pot, and now you're on heroin. Right? And it's not necessarily for everyone going to be that experience, because not everyone who tries marijuana ends up being a heroin addict. But everyone who tries heroin, or who becomes a heroin addict, eventually had started doing that, though. They started with that. You understand that? And everyone who murders starts off hating his brother and being angry with his brother. Not that being angry with your brother will necessitate you murdering him, because you may not have that weakness. But the point is, from God's perspective, you are still a sinner. We are all still sinners. And Paul's trying to bring in everyone guilty, whether they had the law or not. Because those who have the law, boy, that's an extra burden, because, like he says, not an extra, well, it is an extra burden in a sense, because now you have a sure word from God. This is what God says. We have in Revelation here, thou shalt not kill. And before you may have had, if you had any question, well, sometimes. But anyways, let's go through this. Despiteful. Okay, we went through haters of God. Well, haters of God. Despiteful. Spite, as I understand it in the English concept, is that, well, I think of it as when there is, when you do something out of spite, it generally means to kind of retaliate. It's the emotion that creates that retaliation that goes beyond. And I thought I talked about this, and maybe I had another word that I thought fit it better. But like when I think about Tubal-Cain, who said, hey, if Cain should be avenged sevenfold, I should be avenged 7 times 70-fold. Because I killed a man who hurt me, who wounded me. That guy wounded me, and I killed him. So that seems like legitimate retaliation, And it doesn't say, I don't know necessarily that it was a literal wound. I always looked at it as like, if you look at Cain and Abel, Abel had done nothing except show up his brother. There's really no wound there except he did better than him. It was pure envy. Whereas Tubal-Cain, someone had wound, maybe he had, like, let's say, defrauded him in a business deal. There was some inequality of going on there with Tubal-Cain. You know what I mean? So he went beyond revenge, beyond an eye for an eye. That's why I think of as spite. But let's look at what the word in the Greek was. And I don't like to make the study about just breaking everything back to the Greek, but I want to make sure I convey the proper idea here. Since Paul gives such a detailed list, and he likes to give these detailed lists. Hubristes. Hubristes. Now, sometimes you may have heard the word hubris, which is from the Greek. So there you go. A violent, insolent man, according to definition under the Helps word study. A violent, insolent man, what does it say? From hubrizo, probably someone damaging others by lashing out with a nasty spirit. This kind of individual is insolent, delights in wrongdoing. Okay. Finds pleasure in hurting others. That's what G.R. Berry says. Let's see what Dr. Strong says. Again, there's always people's opinions about the translation. It's probably mostly correct. That's we have to go with that, right? He says it's an insulter, a maltreater. Despiteful, injurious. Insulter? To me, it's more like when someone insults you and you punch them in the face. That's kind of despiteful. But usually it's like, I think of spite as like, like a girl breaks up with a guy, and out of spite, he goes and gives her, he slashes her tires. It's that revenge of anger. Okay? I think we generally understand. When I say despite, it's usually, and oftentimes things, it's like an unnecessary level of revenge. It's revenge that's done purely to satisfy our desire to hurt another person. That's how I think of it as spite. It is that which is done merely to injure the other. There's nothing about justice in it. It's like, you touched me, I'm gonna ram it down you. It's that you touch me, I'll hit you 10 times harder. That's what spite does. And it's that attitude also. The Tubal-Cain is a good example. I think that is spite embodied. All right, where I skip ahead. Okay, despiteful, proud. Pride is it's something growing up that I think I've mentioned this many times, just that certain words were kind of like bad words. Proud, because pride was a sin. But the thing is, at the same time, they were always trying to get kids to take pride in their work and this and pride, be proud of this. And I didn't quite get the conflict. Well, no, there was this conflict that I saw, and I was like, I didn't quite understand it. And to this day, I've always wanted to sort that out. And it's because there's nothing wrong with taking what I would call, to take delight in doing a good job. It says, whatever you do, you should do unto the Lord. And you are to covet higher. We are told to covet higher spiritual gifts. And it says down here lower, when we were talking about what were they seeking for? They seek glory. We seek glory. We are glory seekers, hounds of glory, but true glory. Seek that true glory, it says. It's a weird thing because we think of seeking glory as being, but it's only bad because they are seeking it in places that are cheap, or that they're seeking it through cheap means. To have glory in the eyes of God is to have true glory, because his eyes penetrate every deceit, every lie. You stand naked and open before him. If you can stand naked and open before him and receive glory, I mean, that is it. That's the whole thing. That's what you want. That's the whole game. So, in that respect, now, to get there, though, requires humility. So the place of utmost glory also demands the utmost humility. And for us, it should be easy. It should be easy for humans to be humble. And, I'm proud to say I'm not too humble to brag about how humble I am. Because when I'm saying that is like, I've never found that pride was a huge stumbling block for me. I'm not saying I got no pride. I mean, just me even talking about it makes me feel like, yeah, right, Paul. Where's all the humility? It's fine. I'm just saying I'm not ashamed. I'm not that humble. Okay, the humble brag is such a funny thing to do, right? That's why I was like, okay, whatever. I'm not saying I'm particularly humble. I'm just saying the temptation to that. Maybe I've never done anything that made me feel that way. I mean, it's not like I've encountered all these huge, prideful moments of, I don't know, whatever. Again, it's not meant to be boasting in any way, because here I am boasting, because the next thing is boasters. No, but the point is, there is an amount of pride, or that we call it pride, but it's not pride. You know what I mean? There's a certain amount of audacity, boldness that it takes to say God, to look to God to salvation, and then to say, like as Isaiah did, standing before, when he was confronted with God upon his throne, and God says, who will go for us? He says, send me. That's kind of an audacious thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, is it proud? Well, to believe in that you could fulfill that, it's kind of, just like Peter. It's like, God knows our frame. None of us is as humble as we ought to be. It should be easy to be humble. And what I was saying, sometimes I don't think it's that hard to be humble. I don't. And like I said, I just don't think I'd have to have that much temptation to pride. I'm sure for some people it's much harder. I mean, again, I'm not trying to brag humility. What I'm saying is, I try to take a realistic view. Humility, to me, comes from knowing my shortcomings. And as the Apostle Paul said, I would glory, instead of glorying in my strength, it's like, I don't have much temptation to pride. I'm humble. I don't talk about that a lot, because why should something that something that you get easily, there's no work in it. There's no, why would the temptation to pride even be there? But for so many people, their God-given talent and stuff is like this, I'm just wonderful. I'm the greatest thing ever. To me, I look at all the gifts I have and I said, woe is me if I don't use this for God's glory. And I want, because for two things, I don't want to confront that. I don't want to confront disappointing God. I have too much pride in this sense. I don't want to, when I appear before God, I want to appear before him in glory. I don't want to appear before him. And I know there's no way I can do that of my own power. And that's where the ultimate humility comes from, because I can't make it. I won't make it. I may have no natural disposition to certain sins, right? Maybe some things don't tax me as much as they may tax others. Because we know there's plenty of people just filled with pride and full of themselves, boasters, all that stuff. They love to talk about all their accomplishments, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with doing a good job and not being, letting your light so shine before men. That's that weird balance between, and I said pride, I often relate pride to that concept that Jesus talked about of let your light so shine before men, but on the other hand, don't sound the trumpet before you. And that's in the context of the Sermon on the Mount. So he was obviously bringing both concepts together to a certain degree. There is that we don't want to, we want to do our alms in secret. Yeah, on the other hand, we're supposed to let light shine. You know what I mean? Like, how do you make a humble example? You know what I mean? An example of humility. At the same time, aren't you proud of that excellent example you gave? And I'm just showing you the inherent sort of things that there's pit trap after pit trap. You know what I mean? As you approach a sense of righteousness for yourself. So I don't necessarily adopt it. Like Paul says, I'd rather glory in my infirmities. I'm going to look at the things I hope I am more likely to talk about my experience overcoming sins that have plagued me as opposed to all the ease with which I've dodged other things. I'd rather talk about the 2 times I did steal than the fact that, I kind of learned my lesson and blah, again, other people have had a lot more hard time learning to control the impulse to steal, There's 2, one is child, because I talked about it, it's like one was when I was a child and the other was when I was a young man. But it was when I was a young man, I was confronted with something, which is money. Money brought from a source that I didn't, it was just change, anyways. I talked about that. I think whatever, I paid it back, so there you go. Plus interest. Boasters. Again. And this is just nature of human beings. We talk about ourselves. Like I said, this Bible study I'm trying to understand it. And a lot of that understanding comes from my own experience. So it's perfectly normal for just as when Paul talks about his experience with Christ, it's like he gets intermingled. It's not a point of pride. It's a point of preaching. To tell people to understand, it's like, I never feel shy about talking about the things God has done for me, especially when I talk about things like when I received the Holy Spirit. It's like, I'll say that over and over again. I don't care what people think about it. I don't care if it degrades people's opinion. They're like, oh, he's trying to make people think things. I don't care. It's like the truth. If it is the main point is like, if it all, by bearing witness to the truth, I can inspire greater faith in others. That's what I'll do. As long as it's true. The truth, I've often said there's nothing more, to an outside observer, there's nothing that seems more boastful, more arrogant than someone who thinks they know the truth when you don't agree with them. When someone has a lot of certainty, and because certainty in falsehood reads as arrogance. Like someone is just certain about something that's false just because they're certain and they don't have a lot of let's say evidence or reason to back it up. That becomes a form of arrogance. It's misplaced. You can have arrogance that's well placed. You know what I mean? In a sense, it can seem well placed. For example, we see this in the prophets where the king of Assyria, he has all this pride and I can do all these things, and he just has so much. In other kings also, they just take such a sense of, wow, I am so strong and powerful. There's no one who can touch me. And they don't fear God. But they all are brought down in the end. And so, that's why he says, the message is everyone has to give an account. Everyone's going to have to answer for their deeds. And so, which is begging the question, so in light of this, what can men do to be saved? And that's the purpose of the gospel. The gospel of Jesus Christ is what causes us to be saved, because through faith in that, through faith in the things that God has promised, by the things that he has done, by his sacrifice on the cross, by his resurrection from the dead, and by the power of those things and knowing those things and understanding those things, through faith in them, God works in us. And salvation is the result. And when God is working that, there is no other result, because he is our Savior. That's the thing I like to emphasize most of all, is that we have no hope of salvation in ourselves. The point of all of this is not to make you think like, okay, this is the stuff I got to stop doing. It's human nature. Maybe not all, it's like, you think like, well, because like I said, it's like, I don't have a huge temptation to pride, but I've been proud. I mean, gosh, and I've boasted foolishly. I mean, there's nothing wrong with telling people about the good things you're doing, right? But there's also boasting, which is not giving an entirely honest account. It's like trying to make yourself look better. It's where it's about, a lot of times it does have to do with where your headspace is. And that's the thing, is like, I can't judge, because here's a funny thing. Because remember, his whole point about this is, how do we know these things? Because we judge other people, right? And this is the worst part about it with human. It's because, like, you've been looking at somebody, you've been like, he's boasting. That it wasn't that great or whatever. You feel like this is being. You ever had that feeling? It's about, it's like, how do you know that? Where this knowledge come from? It comes from within, because on some level we've all boasted. Maybe when you were a kid, especially when you were a kid. I know I can go back to my childhood and find many more examples of all these things. I was a much bigger. That's what I was saying. We go astray from the womb. Boast. I remember someone was talking about a unicycle. I was like, oh, I could ride a unicycle. And then they opened the garage. There's a unicycle. Why don't you ride it? I'm like, But I didn't mean I knew how to ride one, or I was ready to ride one. I just thought I could learn to do it, right? I mean, and so I immediately said I could do it, even though I wasn't making a claim that that I had the ability then. You know what I'm saying? Like if I said I could climb Mount Everest, right? No, I don't think I could, actually, because I am not fit for that purpose. But let's say I did think I was. I might say that, and it could be a boast that was either true or false. And it's more of a boast if it's false, because then if I'm just saying like, well, if someone was like, do you think you could climb Mount Everest? And I genuinely thought my health was good, and I was like, well, sure. That's not a boast. That's just maybe what I think is a statement of fact. But if I'm lying, it's definitely a boast. Or if I'm using facts merely to aggrandize myself, meaning my purpose in giving the facts is just because, like, hey, I was driving my Maserati and parking it next to my Lamborghini. And I don't have any of these things, of course. And then I was, I jumped on my iPhone 12. I don't know, but not many people have that one. You have to be on a special list. On my iPhone 12, and then I got a tweet back from, I don't know, some famous person. Anyways, again, dropping all this, and maybe it's all true. But it's a boast. Anyways, that's enough for boasting. Inventors of evil things. Disobedience to parents. Inventors of evil things. I wonder if that's a single word in Greek. I'm just curious about that particular thing. Boasters was alazan. And that means a vagabond or an imposter, hence a boaster. Because it's like, there's something inherently dishonest about a boaster. Either you're making you're using facts to make yourself seem greater than you really are. Because no matter because I could talk about all the good things I've done. But, what about all the bad things I've done? I could talk about all the best things I've done, but how much do I want to talk about all the worst things I've done? Let me tell you, I don't want to sit here and talk about the worst things I've done. So I'm definitely not going to tell you about all the best things I've done either. Sit around like boast of that. But that's the point. It's like always an exaggeration when we emphasize only the good. Letting your light shine means letting the light of Christ shine. It's not to bring glory to yourself, but glory to Him. That's the point. That's what we're supposed to be about. Okay, inventor of evil things is actually two words. So, yeah, one is an inventor, a discoverer of evil. Oh, look at this new evil I've cooked up. As the thing is, because as the world gets filled with inventions, among them are the evil inventions. There was like the guy who, I talked about this. I remember hearing the story again. The guy who invented the torture device of the brass calf that they would put someone in and light a fire under, and their screams were constructed so as to sound like it made this noise. Whatever that sounded like a cow, and which the king immediately turned and put the inventor into it, because there's something disgusting about someone who invents such things, right? They invent evil things. Could I talk about our wonderful scientists for a moment? And all their evil inventions, like the one we just suffered? All that deprivation of our rights in the name of fighting their little experiment. I'll tell you, you look how close we're near to being under as much of a theocracy as anyone was ever under with these people who just wave their hands and because to them, following the science means do what the scientists say who work for the government, which is an absurdity. That's an because they were manifestly wrong. They manifestly lied over and over again. They should all be fired and they should be prosecuted. And if there's no laws to prosecute them, we should make laws to prosecute them. They violated all kinds of human rights, as far as I'm concerned, especially things like human experimentation, subjecting people to experiments without their consent, meaning in the name of these mandates and stuff. And you see that, like in New York State, those who resisted steadfast are beginning to see relief in the form of back pay and stuff and reinstatement to their positions, the government workers. Anyone who's fired by their employer ought to sue them for this. There's going, and it's rotten that it's being done, but everyone who stands firm has every reason to be happy. Again, like I said, not to be proud, but to be happy, because you've done the right thing, and so the Lord is pleased. As far as I'm concerned, it's like we should all seek to do what's right in our times. I mean, as far as standing by your conviction. If you weren't convicted, then by all means. I'm just saying, those who had the conviction not to do it and didn't want to participate, you had every right. You had every right, and no one should force you. And I would stand up for that. Even if I wanted to take the experimental drugs and all that, I would still stand up for the rights of others not to. People they come up with evil things. Let's develop a virus that's extremely infectious and deadly. All right. Or let's develop a TV show that has all these vile things in it. God only knows. No, I know. I hear occasionally of the kind of stuff, and I can only imagine. I just remember years ago, even like a decade ago, hearing about the stuff on television and knowing, because again, I don't know if I've mentioned this in a while, but I moved out here in 2001, and we haven't had broadcast television the whole time. I never got a satellite dish or anything like that. Why would I pay money to... it's like paying money to have garbage delivered to your house. You know what I mean? So, I don't get it. So, because it's like, we used to just go to the library and check things out. And of course, there are other ways. There's like a whole There's a whole torrent of ways that one might find all kinds of good things that they could use to, fill their time with selectively, as opposed to having the most godless people in the world just pumping garbage into your home. So anyways, that's one of the reasons my kids grew up without a lot of the baggage I think that a lot of kids did, because they're not exposed to the stuff on the TV and they weren't exposed to it in elementary school. And I found that when I sent a kid to high school, that if I had raised them right, they were generally equipped to take it on at that point. Otherwise, I wouldn't send them. But anyways, because when you go to school, you kind of have to confront the whole world. And not only the world, you have to confront the world in the guise of all these other kids who don't know anything except for the garbage their parents are allowing them to consume at home, as they're not supervising them and not bothering to take a hands-on approach to raising them in any way, shape, or form. You know what I mean? You don't have to be like Mr. Flashcards. I guess I use some flashcards and stuff. But I'm not Mr. Flashcards. I don't go to babies with flashcards and stuff, right? But it's like, and I've always admitted to not being, in many ways, I'm the parent. Maybe some people are as far as in certain terms, but you provide good things to them and you prevent them from having access to evil things. To me, that's like a basic thing you do for your kids. You don't give them, if they ask a fish, you don't give them a serpent. If they ask for bread, you don't give them a stone, as Jesus said. It's a basic fact of life that reflects on a deeper thing about God. That he also wants to do good for us when we ask him. Oh, let's go back to our passage. Or we were still really just talking about inventing evil things, right? There's all kinds of evils out there that people seek to invent and cook up. And there's a certain delight in what new evil they can think of. I gotta say, I heard someone the other. I take a lot of interest in things like from the past and stuff. I don't talk about it in the Bible study much because it's a separate thing. It's like as far as ancient civilizations and stuff like that are very interesting to me. When I was young, what was one of the things my heart wanted to do. The subjects I was most interested in were things like astronomy and archaeology and geology. But I was good at writing and stuff, and that's why I kind of went. And also verbally, I was pretty skilled, and so that's why I headed towards law and political science, which I dropped out of anyways. I don't think any particular thing would have changed that for me at that time. But anyways, the ancient... What was I going to say about the ancient cities? Well, I take a lot of interest in those things, and... Hold on, give me a sip of water. I'm trying to remember where I was thinking of that. It had to do with the inventors of evil things thing. It seems like it should be obvious. It was going to be kind of oblique, actually, I guess. Oh, well, let's move on. All right. Disobedient to parents. Parents ought to be obeyed. Again, that's presuming they are directing you to do the right thing. That's what I was saying, taking an interest in their children. Somewhere along those lines. But anyways, we have to... And for me, it's always a challenging one because as I talked about, I don't get along with one of my parents. But again, I'm not a child anymore. Children have to obey their parents because they need to. I'm a father and a grandfather. You know what I mean? My obligation to my parents at my age is usually to see to it they're taken care of. Like my father is in no condition to give anyone orders. In fact, now he listens to us. and it's okay. And we were, we're respectful to him in that regard. But he has to be taken by the hand, as often happens when people get quite old. And the young, it's their responsibility to look after them and to continue to respect them even when they're old, because that is what honoring your parents is about. Even though they're not the men that once inspired fear in us, or they're not the women that once suckled us or whatever. I don't know. Because for me, it's like when you have a broken relationship in your life, it's hard to see. That one becomes weird. So I try to look at other people who have normal relationships, and I see how it ought to be. So I do think I have an understanding of that as also what honoring your parents looks like. But we also, for the first commandment is to honor God. And when things like that come into conflict, there's issues. And the Pharisees even knew this, and that's why they talked about Korban. But Jesus dismissed this as corrupt. Because Korban, they were saying like, Jesus said, well, the commandment says honor your father and your mother. But you say, and this is this kind of weird verse because how it's supposed to be translated is not exactly clear to me. But the basic idea is, anything that, it's like, but you say that, hey, mom and dad, any help you might have gotten from me is something that's I've already dedicated it to the Lord. So I can't help you. It's all sanctified and set aside. You know what I mean? And you say, well, he should be free. And it goes in our society, it's even worse because it's sort of like mom and dad do not, it's like, it's not even just like, okay, I don't have enough money for you. It's dedicated to God. Because they're saying like, if you have a good enough excuse, you could say, well, that money isn't really available. And it's like some people I know are like, oh, they have all these money problems, but they take 2 vacations a year. But they have money problems. You know what I mean? It's like, so I don't buy in. Just like, oh, we got money problems. We got 3 car payments. I haven't had a car payment in 20 years. About 20 years, I guess. I'm going to pay it off soon after I moved out here, really. So it's been 20 years almost 20 years since I had a car payment. Obviously, I don't drive new cars because I don't know if anybody buys new cars cash. You know what I mean? I often have not had to pay for cars except a small sum, a nominal sum, because I get ones that are quite used and I try to fix them myself, which has its own burdens. But it's like you walk on the edge of the temple, it's scary. But don't jump off. You know what I mean? That's what I mean is that sometimes life takes us into precarious positions where we walk by faith, knowing that there is a possibility of that, by consequence of where our life has taken us, there can be real consequences that because we don't all die a martyr's death. Sometimes we're done and we die. It's not like, I know I've heard, sometimes people die young, and it's an evil in this world. But from God's perspective, it's all the same if they know him. And so when we go out of this world, we shouldn't be alarmed. I don't want to be. I do in a sense often feel though, it's like, I feel like, oh, there's so much more to do, so much more I could do. But maybe the reality is I'm doing already the maximum I'm capable of, But that in the future, maybe there will be more I'm capable of, and that maximum will increase if I should see those days, Because that's the truth. Is like in some ways, in the most essential ways, we are exactly where we ought to be because the Lord is in control. Disobedience to parents. And I often liken that to why we should worship God, because as a child should obey the parents, so we ought to look to God because he is so much, the magnitude of the parents, what would we say, what would we call it, that quality they have over the child? It's not just that they're bigger. It's not just that they're smarter. They have all those things combined. and so much more. They're mature adult humans, and a 2-year-old is a funeral waiting to happen if its parents don't take care of it. Basically, I mean, right? I mean, if they don't take care of that kid, it's going to end up in trouble fast. And so if we don't look to God, we're going to be in trouble. Without understanding, that's an important thing to know. Without understanding. Well, that's certainly me. I've often been without understanding. But again, the word is asunetos. Oh, yeah, sunetos was like that. The word sun in Greek, S-U-N, sun, has this idea of together, like all the ones where it says we are co-heirs with him. It has sun at the beginning. And here, S-U-N, asunetos. It's kind of like A is the prefix of negation, like atheist, asunetos. So sunetos is the intelligence, the ability to put things together in your head, so to speak. And this is without that, without the ability. But I think this is, I don't know, it's a weird thing because it's like understanding. I always think of it as something like, well, understanding is something that we have to go after. With, get you wisdom, and with all you're getting, get you understanding. And because you can have a lot of stuff, you can have a lot of information around you. Like there's all this stuff, all this evidence, right and wrong. I'm not saying to prove you. This is not like, a lot of people treat this passage like, so they know God exists, sort of. What it is they know right and wrong exists. But somewhere deep down, they know that, like, well, if God did exist and was this righteous God, they always say that the loving God doesn't exist because, and they always say that's always where they approach God from the loving aspect, because then they think by taking their own definition of love and plugging in, they can just negate God, because it's impossible. There is no such thing as a loving God. Ha ha ha. Forget that for now. We can address the love of God in another. We will, actually, because it's going to be coming up. But not so much the love, but the righteousness, the justice, right and wrong. To bring about justice in the end. What does that look like? If that were so. They know. It's in them. He showed them. They know this. Everyone that does wrong, that is not, some again, IQ of 60 or something like that, or I don't know where exactly that lies, where you don't really know. There are obviously exceptions. Someone who's brain dead doesn't know right from wrong. Obviously, they don't know anything. But the rule is a rule. Exceptions don't undo it. Without understanding, we need to be able to take all that God reveals to us, and we should think about it and then seek God that maybe we could understand it. Oh God, I don't understand. Like the Ethiopian said in the chariot, how can I understand unless someone help me and some man explain it to me? Well, some man can explain it to you, but how much better if he himself would enter into you and make you to understand. Make me to understand the way of thy precepts. So shall I talk of thy wondrous works, Psalm 119. Covenant breakers. You make a deal, keep it. Especially if they make a contract. There's something more binding. This idea of a contract. Obviously, down the line from contract breaking is lying, deceit, and every kind of work like that. I don't think that, did they even include lying? No, right? Because again, covenant breaking is the worst form of lying. I mean, it's like, like murder is the worst form of hatred. So covenant breaking is the worst kind of lying. Because you didn't just say like an untruth. You like went and made a contract and then in the end you just said, oh, I will, I won't. That's why divorce is so despicable. Especially when it's, no fault. You know what I mean? It's like, nobody's at fault. It's not, like, again, as the Apostle Paul says, you are not in bondage to stay with an unbeliever who doesn't want to stay with you. That's made quite clear in the scriptures. And like I said, and I've always said, it's like, but you're not allowed to foster that situation as a believer. You are trying to make it work. And if they want to make it work and are putting forth a good faith effort, you don't have to be made a fool of either. Someone who's unrepentant. And unrepentant, I mean in the sense of, I don't know. Because like someone can fall in. How many times shall I forgive my brother? Well, if he say he repent, 7 times 70, according to Jesus. So there's a lot of room for repentance we're supposed to give. Because the very last thing he says here is unmerciful. Because I'll tell you what, the one thing I don't want to be seen as by God is an unmerciful man. I'll tell you what, I'm not as merciful as he is. Oh no. I'll tell you what, as men go, I may not be exactly Tubal Cain, but compared to God, I sure am. I mean, compared to God, as far as mercy goes and justice goes, I'm more like Tubal Cain. I'm more likely to want to, at least impulsively, make someone hurt more than they hurt me. Or, well, I don't know if I want it. I feel like I could do it. I feel like in the heat of my reaction, like when I get caught up in my emotions, I can hurt someone more than they're warranted. I don't think I can think about hurting them more than they're warranted, like out of actual spite. But whatever. The thing is, they wouldn't know the difference. So it doesn't, though I may justify myself slightly in my own mind, they wouldn't know the difference. And certainly there's no mercy when we carry out judgment at all. Because mercy rejoices against judgment. Mercy is the thing that, you're not going to be judged. Yeah, you're guilty, but you go free anyways. What? Doesn't God say, well, no ways, let the guilty go free? That's true. That's why if we should happen upon the bonanza of God's mercy, we should take advantage of it and also respect it. Understanding that the mercy of God is not something that he just throws about the place. I think these lists are just too dense for me to get through. I mean, I'm at an hour, and I just feel like there's no end, I forget implacable. Without natural affection. Yeah, there's so much here. That's okay. We'll probably start chapter 2 tomorrow. That's fine. Implacable. Cannot be placated, at least in English. That's what that would indicate. Without natural affection. I think that's one word in Greek. What was it? I think I remember what it used to be. Astorgos. I'm not going to look at it. Orgos. I am looking at it. Unloving, devoid of affection. From Alpha. And Storge. Storge and alpha as a negative prefix. Alpha, not a? Whatever. From a as a negative particle and a presumed derivative of stergo, to cherish affectionately. Hard-hearted towards family. And there you go. Could that be said? Well, that's the thing. Oh, here we go. There's a because there is natural. Like I said, we should have a natural desire to see our children do well. And I think what happens is the reason people don't take a lot of interest in their children is they just allow themselves to believe all these fictions, like it'll be all right, and or I'll get to that later, and so they don't think they're totally blowing it as they totally blow it. Because I get this thing, because I get reports from the school, like of the state of the children. Apparently, they're all just messed up with family problems. Apparently, and I think that's probably because their life has been entirely lived away from home at school, and if they don't have enough time with their parents at home, if they don't, many often do, and if they get that time, it doesn't have to be a ton either. That's the funny thing, but that because they have a natural bond with their parents that the parents only have to foster. It's easier to foster when you don't, because there's a lot of things that sort of break it down. School itself, from my understanding, the thing I heard years ago was that the Germans invented kindergarten, and the purpose thereof was to break the mother-child bond, to begin to separate, so for the express purpose of making the individual an obedient citizen of the state. I said citizen because I just hate saying pawn of the state, because I'm like, but actually that's totally antithetical to what I think of as citizenship. So I don't even like the use of that word there. Anyways, we ought to be naturally affectionate towards our offspring, towards our parents. That is normal. To be without it is not normal. But how do we get there? Because like I said, I feel it in myself. I was like, well, was that always so? No, it grew up. It grew up over time. Not out of a willingness to condemn, in a sense of because it can be this way. And I just want to say this to comfort some people who have trouble, because sometimes it's like it said, you're not in bondage to love people that insist on doing hateful things. When someone insists on doing evil, we are not under bondage to maintain a relationship with them. And, it is not a sign that you've lost natural affection when you find it impossible to love someone who insists on doing evil. When you find you just can't foster warm feelings because someone just continually, and not only does evil, but doesn't even seek forgiveness and refuses any sort of acknowledgement, and doesn't even like to acknowledge the evil they do, the destructive nature of their actions. It's hard to maintain. It's not natural to be affectionate towards someone of that nature. When someone is so destructive in your life, it actually, what in a confusing way has caused me, when it's someone actually close to you who you should feel affection for, it blows your mind. It ought, because there should be by nature there something. And so when it's gone, to me, that the way I look at it is, I was a child. I didn't make it go away. I wasn't the one in control of the situation. And to me, it's not out of I've always sought to be obedient to the Lord in all things. And as far as that goes, I don't think I've been. And it's not a brag, but it's like, I don't think that I got here because of that. Because I do feel, because most people who know me would say, actually, Paul, you are a very naturally affectionate person. And that's true. That ain't a lie. And it's not a brag either. It should be the most normal thing of all. We should all have natural affection. Like Jesus says, though the heathen love their families. It's no brag when you say, I love my kids. It's like, well, everyone loves their kids. Not everyone, of course. Sometimes we have those notable examples, right, of horrible people who don't love their kids. It's no boast. But sometimes people, out of their own wickedness, will despise those they ought to love by nature. What's funny? I guess because as someone who has experienced that feeling, but for whom I don't think it was natural, I think I kind of understand somehow, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure I do. I feel like like I said, I don't understand how someone could lose natural affection without it being almost, like beaten out of them. How I don't understand it. So actually, in a way, I feel like, though it's a sin that makes me really look closely at myself, and it causes me almost like I get there and I'm like, okay, I gotta examine this. Even so, in some ways, I feel like that I can't even see myself as culpable in such an thing, because it's not true. But also, it is kind of true because it's a state of being. I couldn't stir up. There's people who I feel like I ought to have love for whom I could not stir up a tear because of their just absolute insistence on evil. This is the aspandos, without libation, without truce, or hence admitting of no truce. That was implacable. Cannot be placated. Won't make a truce. Can't be made peace with. You know what I mean? That often is where things like without natural affection come from, because it's like some people, you may have had, I've had other members of my family, people who cannot be pleased. And that's just absolutely ridiculous. Like, who gave you the right to make these ultimate demands that you need to be pleased all the time? Implacable. Unmerciful. We talked about merciful. Unmerciful. God, there's a whole parable about that. That, the guy who owed his master much, and he was forgiven. But then he went and found his fellow servant who didn't owe hardly anything at all. And had him thrown into prison till he should pay. And his Lord was very angry with him and said, you received mercy, you should have showed it, to paraphrase. You should have showed mercy. Because I showed you mercy. You owed so much and you couldn't forgive this little thing. It's like, they know the judgment of God. We all know the judgment of God. Again, we may not fit into all these categories. There have been times where I was implacable, where I was just where I would just, plenty of times. Actually, when I think about it, I'm a bit implacable at times, right? There's one I could throw myself under the bus over. I try not to be ultimately implacable, but there are definitely moments, right, where I'm kind of in a bad mood, right? And nothing can please me. Nothing satisfies me. Nothing. You want this? No. No. And I'm not. Again, it's not exactly murder, and it's not exactly hatred. It might be a little angry with your brother, or it might be just angry in yourself, which is not quite the same. But still, it makes us exude this quality of being impossible to please. There's no amount of there's no bargaining. There's no, it's like, will this please you? No. Some people are like that. Once they get something over on you, that's it. Or they never forget. Never forget a mistake you make. We all want God to forget our sins. So we should try to be good at forgetting the sins of others, especially those committed against us. Because on some level, I have the most authority over anything done against me. I mean, things that done against me, I can forgive. I can't really say to someone, except in the name of Christ, you're forgiven, for something that doesn't involve me. How can I tell someone they're forgiven if it doesn't involve me? Well, because for Christ's sake, I can say, well, you are forgiven. But again, we got to seek it. We must seek him. And seeking him is like this continual thing. It's not a one-time thing. I sought him, I found him, and that's it. Then I just went back to my life. No, there's no going back. They which commit such things are worthy of death not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. People know that all this stuff, they know it's all bad. Like when they sit there being implacable, they know they're being absolutely selfish, absolutely cruel. You know? And whenever they talk about God, you know, when the wicked talk about God, they say, "Oh God, I would tell him," and "Oh, why'd you do this?" Why? You know, all these accusations. But it's really an accusation of themselves, because they're the ones who've done all these things. They not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. There's a certain that's the perverseness of man, is that we take pleasure in the wicked. I mean, come on, what do you think television is about? There's so many shows where it's just like watching people behave badly, murder each other, commit adultery on each other, all that stuff. I mean, I'm just thinking about like things like daytime TV when I was a kid, and you know, and I can only imagine it's much worse now. People take pleasure in that, you know, not only doing, they know that the things that they do are wrong, and this is the essence of the, right, the reprobate mind, the mind that is rejected of God. It is given over to all these things, and a lot of this is internal, and that's where it's really, you know, where it really becomes, you know, because like as Jesus said, it's not what goes into a man that defiles him. It's that which comes out of him. Because out of the heart proceeds fornication, adultery, all these things, lies. They all have their origin within inside us, in our hearts. What makes us implacable? Is it a sin of the flesh? No, it's a sin of the heart. So say, that's what I was saying. Like, is it this body that makes me do all these sins? Sure, some of them, definitely, and maybe it makes me more susceptible to all of them. But if the body makes me sin, what's Satan's excuse? I mean, is he flesh also? Well, no. Okay, well, that's an hour and plus. We may have a little more to say. We're going to be picking up at chapter 2, but we'll read into it a little bit. Probably just... probably about verse 28. I think that's a good place. But that's the point, is that we have no excuse. We know all these things are wrong. When someone's being implacable, we know they're being implacable, and we know when we are. In fact, we mostly know of implacability through our own implacability. Unfortunately, you know, most of the time, hopefully we all learn to like come down. You know, come down off your high horse and be placated. Accept an apology. Accept restitution. Accept whatever. Accept just maybe you'll never get an apology. There's some levels of acceptance where it's just, that's all we can do. Anyways, so we'll pick it up at chapter 2. I'd like to talk. I feel like I don't want to drop the subject because we're kind of in the middle of it, but whatever. Now we've covered all the just individual stuff, and we'll move on. So thanks for joining me, and hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow.
A psalm of David when Nathan the prophet came unto him after he had gone into Bathsheba. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity, cleanse me from my sin. For I acknowledge my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me.